Okay, cracked out the Blue Yeti microphone to do a quick recording because I felt like it might be useful to do a quick encounter building tutorial, possibly for new DMs, maybe old DMs. But I think over the last couple of years I got into grips with how to make fairly decent combat encounters, but well, I don't know, ask my players, I guess, but I think about it enough to have a lot of opinions on it. So maybe it's worth sharing those. So this is one of several Google Docs that I use to keep track of the game. This is for the current campaign arc, Arc 4, and the heroes have just arrived at a Harpy Nest. And they have arrived here deliberately. They have fought the Harpies twice before, and they're here because they want to kill the Harpy Queen, because she is a threat. The features of this encounter are that the heroes are vastly outnumbered, but they know that they're vastly outnumbered. And they've snuck to the center of the nest to try and kill the Harpy Queen. But now that they're here, and the Harpy Queen is in this tower on the right-hand side, and the heroes are over here on the left. Now that they're here, they realize it's not that easy for them to approach the tower without being seen, because the tower is surrounded by Harpies who are just kind of going around their business. Most of them are just napping or eating, basically. So the heroes have gotten here and they want to try and kill the queen, but they're in the unfortunate situation where they can't really do it without also fighting the rest of the Harpies. And the end of our last game ended with the heroes basically accepting this fact and saying, okay, well, we still have the element of surprise because we've snuck in under cover of the trees, and so we can at very least kick the fight off by killing as many of the nearby Harpies as possible, and then possibly jumping the queen or pulling her out of her tower, and then trying to kill her as quickly as possible. Now, I'm not going to publish this video until after Saturday's game, when the players will already know the things that I'm about to tell you, which is that there's not going to be a huge amount of time between the moment where they have now killed all these Harpies and the Harpy Queen appearing. And I'm probably going to give them 1, maybe 2 rounds to organise themselves and start the fight if they want to. If they want to run into the tower and attack the queen, then they can do. In my opinion, the heroes maybe could have done a little bit more in this scenario strategically, possibly by gaining a little bit more information. They know quite a lot about this area because they talked to one of their allies about the situation beforehand. And so they know sort of roughly how many Harpies there are. They know the terrain. They knew where the Harpy Queen was going to be. They had a good idea of what they were up against. But in this particular scenario, now that they're here, they could have done something to try and get a little bit more information, like what's inside this tower. Because there's a few things in there that will sculpt the course of the battle. Like, for example, this tower has 2 floors. The Harpy Queen is on the 2nd floor. So the chances of them being able to get to the Harpy Queen and sort of lock her down before she gets airborne are pretty unlikely. The other thing is there are a lot of humanoid skeleton bones on the base of the tower, which has been hinted at through the fact that the area smells like decay, smells like death. But if the heroes saw that, they might have a better inkling of what is likely to happen in the fight. We'll get to that shortly. The other thing that the heroes could have done was, this is a difference of experience and opinion, but in my opinion, Dungeons and Dragons is a combat game in much the sense of a lot of RPGs where you play as a team, where different members of the team have different roles within the group in a combat scenario. And so you've got your tank, you've got your various different forms of damage dealer, and then you've got your support characters. And that can influence the way that you structure your combat tactics, because if you go into a situation where you recognize this is going to be a fight, it's going to be a knockdown, drag out brawl, it's not going to be a quick assassination, then you can set up the fight so that your squishier members of your team are well protected and your team is arranged in order to maximize your damage while minimizing your opponent's damage. And what that generally means is you put your tanks at the front, you put your damage dealers at the side, you put your support characters at the back. The players could be doing that right now, but their strategy, as it often does revolve around the idea of everybody's trying to accomplish the same objective, so we're all going to try and accomplish that objective. And here the objective is, well, we have to kill the Harpy Queen, so all of them are going to try and kill the Harpy Queen in their own way. Whereas if they looked at it as, this is going to be a fight, one of the things I suggested to Adam yesterday was, if the Paladin, Mihai, walked into the center of the courtyard and announced his presence and almost pretended to be alone, he could attract the attention of all the Harpies. They would most likely swarm him and nobody else. He has great damage reduction against multiple enemies because he has heavy armor master. And then the group's bard, Iroh, could use a sleep spell to try and sleep as many of the Harpies as possible at once. But the heroes are going for the strategy of, let's kill everything and then we'll fight to the death, which isn't really much of a plan as much as it is just a mentality. But we'll see what happens. I think they'll be okay. But my challenge, and I guess in a roundabout sense, what we've finally gotten to being the point of this video, is how do you create a combat encounter that is fun for the players in a situation like this? And the big challenges are, Dungeons & Dragons is about the players. Combat should reflect that fact. Combat should be about the players. And it should be their turns that are of most importance. Nobody wants to sit around and watch me, the Dungeon Master, roll 50 dice. Okay, it's just not interesting for everybody else. And so we have to construct a combat encounter here that is true to reality, which is to say the heroes are vastly outnumbered, is still feasibly winnable, because I'm not just going to crush them, because they haven't done anything stupid. Not really. And their characters are prepared. They've caught the Harpies off guard. So the situation is certainly winnable. And then the third thing is the combat has to remain fresh. And what I mean by that is I am fully expecting that this Saturday's game is going to be probably a 4-hour fight, which is something we've done before. But that 4-hour fight cannot be the players just continually fighting Harpies for 4 hours. There has to be an ebb and flow to the combat that creates variety and keeps the game fresh. And a big part of that is introducing new elements or surprising elements, every round or every other round. And you can do that through monster abilities, and you can do that through character motivations. So we're going to take a look at a couple of monster abilities that allow us to do that, and a few other abilities that are used to keep the focus on the players and give them strategic options. And we're going to look at character motivations and how that is used to influence the ebb and flow of a combat, okay, in order to keep the combat fresh. And I guess I'm doing this for Dungeon Masters who love encounter design and want to talk about it. But I'm aware that the amount of time that I think about this is a lot more than probably most Dungeon Masters can afford to, or have the mind to. And so if you're a newer Dungeon Master or you're a little bit less confident, you might find this helpful in order to help you build a similar sort of combat encounter or to model the kind of mindset that you want to adopt when you are designing a combat encounter. So the philosophy of the focus should be on the players and combat should be challenging but keep the game fresh for the players. Those are great philosophies that you can adopt in any combat encounter, not just one where there are lots and lots of bad guys for the villains to fight. So the idea that we're trying to model here is sort of Helm's Deep, or like Anakin and Obi-Wan versus 50 droids, right? How can 2 people fight 50 droids? Well, you can construct a combat scenario that is fun for the players and keeps things fresh, while also being a realistic interpretation of that scenario and still being fun. So that's what we're going to try and do. So here's the map, but if I scroll out, and I haven't done this with the players because even though they snuck into this place is shrouded in a mist, and there is a plot relevance to that we don't need to go into, but the players' visibility is very reduced, so they actually can't see the entire map. But this whole area is the Harpies Nest. So I've strung together quite a few maps here that I got from Drive-Thru RPG, so thank you to those guys. But this place is filled with harpies. I have not put them on the map, or rather I've actually removed them from the map. They were there originally, but I've removed them because the format of this fight is going to focus on this section of the map here, and it almost certainly isn't going to vary from this. And so when harpies come into that area, they will get placed on the map by me, which is to say I have 2 documents open. One of them, I already have positioned the harpies where they will arrive. I simply copy that and I paste it into here. And then that is the beginning of the new round of combat on the turn of the harpies, right? These new harpies show up. And so the players, I don't need to go to another part of the map and pull them over, okay? It doesn't need to be that realistic. It can just be, it's a new round, more harpies show up. They are here, 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 here. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of how you can use that in order to create a fun combat encounter for the players that doesn't take up loads and loads of time. So let's take a look at the stat blocks that we're going to be using. And there are 3 different stat blocks here. There are a couple of others that might become relevant in the later stages of the fight, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. The idea here is we're using a swarm of harpies, and we're using a Harpy Queen. The Harpy Queen is a mutant amalgam of actually 2 Harpy Queens. The players already know this. It's relevant to the plot, but that part of the plot is not relevant to this video, so all you need to know is the Harpy Queen, the boss, is 2 creatures that have been mutated together. Okay, and she's a legendary creature. And then the harpies are represented by the stat block in the top left. And like I said before, the players have fought these harpies already on 2 other occasions. On the other occasions where they fought these harpies, the harpies had 8 hit points, and they had a multi-attack. And they had a Blood Frenzy ability, which was to give them advantage if they were attacking a target that had any hit points missing, which is a great ability. It's a brilliant monster ability because it provides direction for the monsters and gives the players something that once they realize that it is the case, they can react to, right? So, for example, going back to the idea of players and their characters having roles, if you've got a tank and you've got a squishy character, if the person who is taking responsibility for healing heals the squishy character to 4 hit points, then the harpies are going to go after the tank if the tank is missing any hit points. So you can actually use that to direct the flow of combat in a way that is advantageous for the players. But they have to pick up on that. Now, the other ability that the harpies have is called Cursed Return. And the players have encountered this before, so they know this, but they have forgotten, I think. When the harpies die, they come back as undead creatures, if they weren't already undead. So this obviously can only happen once. This ability throws a couple of spanners in the works for the players in their current strategy, because, just going back to the map quickly, the harpies that are greyed out here are the ones that they assassinated at the end of the last game. But what I believe they've forgotten is that the harpies come back to life as undead creatures. And so having killed all these creatures, they are going to almost immediately come back as undead. And that's going to cause problems for them, because the bad guys are immediately going to be aware of their presence. On the top half of the screen, you see the Bard Iroh casts Sleep at the end of the last game, which is very effective here, because there are, a large number of tightly packed enemies with very few hit points, which is when Sleep is at its best. And it also mitigates the problem of the harpies coming back to life, because they aren't dead, they're asleep. So that's very effective. With this particular game, as part of trying to keep the combat fresh and make it so the players aren't watching me roll loads of dice, I have simplified that harpy stat block. And I strongly recommend doing this if you want to run a combat encounter with lots and lots of bad guys, because I don't want to keep track of 50 harpies hit points. Okay, so with this version of the harpy stat block, they will have 1 HP. They still come back as undead, which means each of them does have to be killed twice, but I don't have to keep track of hit points, and I don't even have to ask the players to roll damage. Okay, that will speed the game up significantly, because this is going to be a combat encounter that probably lasts about 10 rounds. There are 6 players, and there are the possibility of there being 50 harpies. So reducing the amount of dice being rolled will speed the game up a lot. If a player says, I attack 2 harpies, I just say, make 2 attack rolls, assuming both of them roll above 11, which there is a 75-80% chance of happening, then the harpies just die. Okay, it speeds the game up immensely. What I've done, aside from reducing the hit points, is I changed Blood Frenzy and took away their multi-attack so that Blood Frenzy gives them their multi-attack if the target is below maximum hit points. So what this means is that the Harpies are still incentivized to attack people who are missing HP, so they're going to have the same behavior patterns as before, but it means I'm rolling less dice because the Harpies don't have advantage on their attacks. So I only have to pick up, if let's say they're attacking a target that is wounded, all I have to do is pick up 2d20s, roll both of them, and then add 4. And then I say, does a 19 and a 15 beat your armor class? And the player says yes and no. You take 4 points of damage. The original version of the Harpies also had damage dice, so their attacks were doing, I think, 2d4 plus 1. Now I've just averaged it to 4 damage and 5 damage. The effect there is I don't have to roll any dice. So again, it's quicker. Okay, makes a huge difference. But it means that the Harpies' behavior is the same because they're still going after wounded targets. Now, what I imagine will happen, in fact, I'm probably going to say this even if the players don't ask, because they will realize pretty quickly, hold on, these Harpies had 8 hit points before, why do they only have 1 hit point now? You can think about it as the players have fought these Harpies on 2 previous occasions, and the Harpies physically have not changed, but the heroes have learned to adapt to their behavior. And so because the heroes have fought them twice before, they know exactly what Harpies are, going to do in a fight, but they just have a better idea, the same way you do when you fight somebody on multiple occasions. And so the heroes' attacks are just more effective. They kill a Harpy with any attack. They know where to strike it. They know how the Harpy is going to move to try and avoid the attack, that kind of thing. And again, for the same reason, the Harpies' attacks themselves are less effective against the heroes because the heroes know how to anticipate what the Harpies will do when they attack. Okay, so the Harpies' behavior remains the same, but they are effectively less powerful against the heroes. In terms of the balance of the encounter, that just means I can afford to throw more Harpies at the players, which is in line with the theme of you guys are fighting 50, 60 Harpies. What are you going to do? The second part of building this encounter when it comes to the stat blocks is the boss monster, which is obviously meant to be the focal point of the fight. So this monster has to be memorable and interesting. It has to present a reasonable challenge to the players that they can figure out in order to strategize against it. So it has to have behavior patterns and strengths and weaknesses. And the boss monster has to be able to survive long enough to present a reasonable threat. And there are a number of different ways that you can create a boss monster that doesn't get one shot. The easiest way of doing it is with hit points, which isn't very interesting, but can be effective. It's better to increase the number of hit points on a monster rather than increasing its armor class, because players like to hit, and if they miss, they get bored. So it doesn't matter if the monster survives 6 turns because it didn't take any damage or because it had just had 1,000,000 hit points. If I want it to survive for 6 rounds, the players will enjoy the version where it has 1,000,000 hit points more because they will actually get to hit with their attacks, and that's much more fun for them. So this monster has over 100 hit points. The players are 6th level. There are 6 of them. Normally 100 hit points is something the players can do in 1 round. So how else does this monster defend itself? Well, first and foremost, it has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage from non-magical attacks. Half the players in the party have magical weapons, but they know that this creature has this resistance because they've fought it once before, and they forced it to retreat. So some of them have investigated the option of bringing magical weapons with them when they normally wouldn't have them. And the other thing is that this is a flying creature. So as soon as it takes off, a large number of the party become a lot less effective against it because they're melee-based. Right? So the barbarian, paladin, one of the rogues is a swashbuckler, so his sneak attack is much more difficult to apply on ranged attacks than it is on melee attacks. And one of the members of the party is a bard with basically only close range abilities when it comes to damage. I don't think he has a ranged cantrip, which is an interesting tactical choice, but he is a College of Swords, so he does have multi-attack, so he doesn't really need to invest too heavily into his cantrips being effective in combat. So this being a legendary creature, it can also use its legendary actions to defend itself. So if you're familiar with legendary creatures, a legendary creature is a creature that has, on top of its regular action, it has legendary actions. And legendary actions are used by that monster at the end of other creatures' turns. They do not use the creature's reaction. And the number of legendary actions that a creature has is normally 3, but it can be more or less. Most legendary creatures will have a selection of different legendary abilities that they can use, and each of those abilities uses a certain number of actions. Most of the time, they'll have 2 abilities that cost 1 of their actions, and then 1 ability that costs 2 actions, as this one does, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. And every time it uses a legendary action, it uses up one of its uses of legendary actions, and then it gets them back at the start of its turn. So this particular legendary creature, in order to survive long enough to make the fight interesting, one of its legendary actions is called Swoop, and it allows the creature to fly up to its speed. It does not prevent attacks of opportunity. So one of the things that this creature is going to have to do during combat is maintain a position where it doesn't get into melee with too many people at the same time, because it doesn't really have much of a defense for escaping, aside from actually just flying out of their reach and suffering attacks of opportunity. It can use its action to disengage or to dodge, but that is once you start getting into that kind of territory, the monster is basically doomed because it's not being an effective threat. So I've written on the left-hand side a couple of tactics for the Harpies, which are very simple, and the tactics for the legendary creature, which are a lot more complex. You'll also notice that there is a stat block over here for Flesh-Picked Skeleton, which is part of what I talked before about the idea of providing ebb and flow to a combat. So this legendary creature is called Aelo and Akipati, because it's 2 creatures that have been melded into one. And as a Harpy Queen, Harpies ordinarily have an ability to sing and a powerful magical voice. And so I gave Aelo and Akipati 2 magical songs because there are 2 creatures. They can't use both of them at the same time because it requires a bonus action to keep singing, and the monster only has 1 bonus action. Now, I have written here, Dual Nature. Aelo and Akipati have, firstly, advantage on mental checks and saves because they have 2 heads. But on their turn, they also take 2 actions instead of 1. So it builds into this dual nature of the creature, which makes it an interesting monster to fight. And also creates a lot of options for me as a DM. But with the additional caveat of, because the monster has to use its bonus action, which it only has 1 of, to maintain the song, it can't use both songs at the same time. Each song can only be used once per day. And the monster can't use its bite attack if that particular head is singing. Okay. So while it has 2 actions, it can't use its most powerful attacks with both of its actions, because if one head is singing, that head can't bite. So you have one head singing and the other head biting, and then they switch. Okay, and the 2 different songs are what provide the ebb and flow to the combat, in a sense. Okay, so Aelo and Akipati start off with Aelo's song, which is called Chilling Verse, and then when Chilling Verse stops being effective, Akipati starts singing the crescendo in chorus, which provides a different aspect to the fight. This might not be the final version of these particular monsters. They might change somewhat by the time Saturday evening comes around. So let's do a quick note on what Chilling Verse and Crescendo and Chorus actually do. So Chilling Verse is an ability the players encountered last time they fought her, where it's designed around the idea of making a creature succumb to its worst nightmares, and there's a plot-related reason for this. And so anybody who fails their save against Chilling Verse is frightened of Aelo and Akipati, and they have to attack a random person on their turn. So this is meant to mimic a spell called Enemies Abound, which I think was released in Xanathar's Guide. The players have fought against this before. They are prepared for it. They brought earplugs with them, and I think Iroh the Bard is preparing Counter Charm, which is very effective. So there's a strong chance that Chilling Verse won't be particularly effective against them, which is fine. Good job to them if that happens to be the case. That's adequate. It's decent preparation, and I like that in a game. But there are 6 of them. There are 6 players, and one of them has a negative wisdom score, and one of them has a neutral wisdom score +0. And only one of them has an actual proficiency in wisdom saving throws. So the chances are, on a DC 14, even with advantage, 2 of them will fail. So this is probably going to be something that they have to deal with. Now, won't talk about this too much, but the heroes have a minor NPC companion with them in the form of a familiar who serves one of the hero's allies. It's an empowered familiar, so the range on it is increased versus the normal find familiar statistics. But their ally can cast spells through the familiar, touch spells. So spells like Remove Curse and Cure Wounds, which will support the heroes so that they can continue to fight a long-term fight, even though they don't really have a healer in the party. They have a bard and they have a ranger and they have a paladin. But none of those guys have any sort of specialization in healing. So they're good at getting people up from 0 hit points, but they're not great at healing people for large amounts, and they're not great at removing debilitating effects. So that is probably going to be the role that familiar plays in the fight, is to minimize the effect of Chilling Verse, and a couple of other abilities as well. So as it says over here in the tactics section, and I strongly recommend that you as a DM write down the tactics for your monsters, especially if you've got a complicated combat encounter, because it will speed things up when you're actually playing the game. You won't have to think about what the monsters are going to do, and that means that you can spend more time focusing on your players and their turns. So here are the tactics for Aela and Occipity. So Aela opens with Chilling Verse, and Occipity uses Bite. They have advantage on grapple checks against targets that have missing hit points, which might seem kind of random, except in a fight where you've got a Harpy Queen and her Harpy Brood, one of the things that I thought might be interesting would be, why not make the Harpy Queen feed the heroes to her brood? So one of her strategies is fly down on somebody vulnerable, pick them up, bite them. So picking them up is the grapple action, which replaces her claw attack. Pick them up, bite them, fly up high, use the legendary action to fly higher, and then because you can drop somebody as a free action, you just drop them. Right, so you drop them into a group of harpies who are positioned ready to prey on that particular person. So I thought giving her a grapple attack would certainly provide a lot of interesting challenge to the players that they are going to have to deal with. I imagine the first time it might catch them off guard a little bit, and then after that they hopefully will modify their tactics so they don't get ruined by it, because it's quite an effective strategy, I think, or it will be. Even if the players have got high armor class and the harpies are only +4 to hit. There is the note here that when most of the harpies are dead, Occipity uses Crescendo in Chorus, which, if I scroll down a little bit, reads that it raises all humanoid corpses nearby as skeletons. Now, thankfully not the skeleton stat block from the Monster Manual, because that one has, I think, an AC of 14 and about 11 hit points, which would actually be really difficult to deal with if there were any number of skeletons. This party don't have a whole lot of AoE options. So there is another stat block here for the skeletons, where they also only have 1 hit point, but they are a little bit more effective than the harpies when it comes to dealing damage. They do a bit more damage, and they have a slightly stronger melee attack. And these are meant to just be more popcorn for the players to burn through. I want them to have that kind of Helm's Deep feel. I'm a little bit worried that the Crescendo in Chorus won't provide enough variety in the fight, because it actually is almost a continuation of what they've been doing before, where they're just fighting lots and lots of enemies that are weak, basically. So maybe that will get changed. I'm not 100% certain. But I don't want Crescendo in Chorus to be something that just outright ruins the players after they've spent 2 hours fighting for their lives. So maybe that would change to something slightly different. Second note here says that Ella and Occipity will suffer an attack of opportunity in order to leave melee. So they will specifically target isolated people, and then if their grapple attack fails, they will still use the rest of their movement to escape. And suffer 1 attack of opportunity rather than allowing the heroes to use their extra attack features, right? So Ella and Occipity are not going to stay near the ground when it's not their turn. And then there's a couple of notes about their strategy when it comes to grappling creatures and blocking them. Their last ability is called Call the Weak, which uses both actions of the creature, or it can be used using 2 actions as a legendary action. And this is meant to symbolize the idea that this is a creature that works in concert with its brood. So, yeah, it signals for the other Harpies to use their reactions to tear somebody apart, basically. I think I wrote down that they would only, Airlair and Akipity would only use this feature if somebody was being attacked by sort of 4 or more Harpies and Skeletons. Otherwise, it's more effective for Airlair and Akipity to just bite and claw the target or use their grapple drop. That's effectively phase 1 of this fight, or possibly even phases 1 and 2, if you consider Crescendo and Chorus to be a phase 2. My expectation is that the fight will most likely play out as the players really needing to clear the Harpies, because I haven't mentioned this already. The Harpies are not all going to show up at once. And in fact, what I've done is I've written out a structure. I do not recommend that you do this for every single fight. I only did this because this fight is going to be very complicated. I wrote out a structure for each round of combat based on my predictions. These things might change. Somebody might do something unexpected or roll a critical hit. And Airlair and Akipity could die in round 2. I don't know. But my expectation is the fight will develop with most of the Harpy brood showing up on sort of round 3. So you get a few Harpies in round 1, where the players get the chance to position themselves. You get more Harpies in round 2, where things start to get a little bit hairy, and then rounds 3 and 4, the rest of the Harpies show up, and then the players have really got to try and manage that rather than trying to kill the queen. Otherwise, they'll get overwhelmed. The big part for the players, the big problem is that if you kill a Harpy, it comes back next turn, 1 time. So you actually have to kill every Harpy twice. So when there are 50 Harpies that you've got to kill, that's actually 60 Harpies. It's actually 100 Harpies. Okay, so it's a big challenge, even for 6 players. So they're going to have to think tactically. They're going to have to use the tower for cover, I think. Otherwise, they're going to get overwhelmed because they'll get surrounded and they won't be able to direct the Harpies' attacks onto the 2 tanks, the Barbarian and the Paladin. There's also a couple of notes here about something called Convokers. The players know that the Harpy Queen was sort of corrupted by an outside influence that they have met, and that influence is called the Dread. They are these sort of faceless white creatures with 4 arms who prey on other creatures' fear. And they attack from... You could call it attacking from the shadows. In reality, they more or less live on the ethereal plane, and they can switch between the 2 planes at will. And so the Dread can currently be seen by the Bard because he has True Seeing cast on him by one of the allies of the party. And so he and only he knows where the Dread are nearby because he can see them. But the Dread can tell that he can see them because they can sense that he is looking at them. And so they are currently following the group and just watching. And there is a chance that they may show up during the fight, depending on how the fight goes, because they don't care about the Harpies. They will use the Harpies as bait. And then if there's an opportunity to show up and either capture or kill one of the heroes, then they will do that if the opportunity presents itself. So they're just going to watch and wait, and if an opportunity presents itself, then they will strike. So I wrote a note for each NPC or bad guy in this fight, what they do on every round. So you've got the legendary creature, Airlair and Akipity, you've got the Convokers, you've got the Harpies, and then you've got Taika, which is the name of the NPC ally who is acting through the familiar. And I don't do this for every fight. This is only because this fight is going to be very complicated, and I don't want to have to think too much during the game. I want to be focused on descriptions of players using their cool abilities and making sure that I'm prepared enough to make sure they have a good time. What I have written up here, and I don't do this all the time, but on a fight like this, I'm definitely going to do it, is it's okay to cheat on initiative. And I'm slightly hesitant to reveal this to my players. I don't do this all the time, but fights are about the players having fun. And chance has to play a big role in that, but certain abilities of the Harpy Queen only really work if they happen in concert with the Harpies. And so I want to make sure sort of the Harpy Queen goes before the Harpies do, for example. And the Harpies are really there to make the players feel like heroes. And so one of the things I'm going to do with the Harpies is when the Harpies show up each round, they have to use all of their movement to get onto the battlefield. And so the Harpies aren't going to get to attack immediately as soon as they show up. What that means is when the Harpies arrive, the heroes have a chance to react to them before they get attacked. And that means that I can afford to throw 60 Harpies at my players and they will not be overwhelmed because they are acting first. So the Harpies go at the bottom of the initiative. And when they arrive, the players have a whole round to deal with them before they get hit by them. And that will make the combat feel like the heroes are in danger of being overwhelmed without, hopefully, running out of hit points too quickly. But meanwhile, the Harpy Queen is the main focus of the fight. And so she has to have a proactive role. So she needs to go at the top of the initiative so that she can be ahead of the curve, basically. Taika, who is the support character for the players acting through her familiar, she needs to go at the bottom of the round because she needs to react to things. So I put her at the bottom as well. There's no point in her going first in the initiative. Again, this also means I'm saving on dice rolls. Okay. Notice that what I'm not necessarily doing here is I'm not saying that Ayala and Akipti go first. I'm saying they go on initiative 20. So that means that when some of my players roll over a 20, which will happen because there are 2 rogues, then they can go ahead of Ayala and Akipti and they are still rewarded for their high rolls. Right. So yeah. I think that's most of the elements that I wanted to talk about. This is very complicated and don't recommend that you do this for all of your D&D games, but I know that this is probably going to be the entirety of the next session. And so having an adequate amount of preparation is a really good idea. The same way I would prepare for a game that I thought was going to be them exploring a new location or meeting a new NPC. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll survive. Love to hear your thoughts. And I imagine most people who watch this will be people that know me. So feel free to come and talk.